The hot iron pressed against Ashlyn Thorne's forearm before she could pull away. The scent of burning flesh mingled with imported French perfume. Vivian Ashford's signature combination repeated every third Thursday for the past 4 years, 9 months and 12 days. Ashlyn bit down on her tongue hard enough to taste copper. She would not give the Luna the satisfaction of hearing her scream. Not today, not ever. "Clumsy girl," Vivian said, her voice dripping with false concern as she lifted the heated styling rod. "You really should be more careful when you're working near hot implements." "What if you had burned me instead?" Ashlyn kept her amber eyes downcast, fixed on the polished marble floor. "Forgive me, my lady." Through the ornate mirror, she caught Vivian's reflection. Golden hair cascading in perfect waves. Ice blue eyes glittering with something cold and hungry. Beautiful, cruel, and utterly untouchable in her position as Luna of Stonehaven territory. The burn on Ashlyn's arm throbbed in time with her heartbeat, joining the constellation of scars that mapped nearly 5 years of torment across her skin. This was the 17th time Vivian had branded her. Ashlyn had stopped counting the whip marks after 41. "You're forgiven," Vivian purred, reaching back to pat Ashlyn's cheek with deceptive gentleness. Her fingers lingered just long enough to press against an old bruise. "Just try not to disappoint me again." The words carried layers of threat that only Ashlyn could hear. To anyone else, Vivian Ashford was the picture of grace, a Luna who embodied everything a pack could want in their alpha's mate. Poised, elegant, devoted. But here alone in these chambers, the mask slipped away to reveal the monster beneath. Ashlyn resumed her work with steady hands despite the fresh wound. Her fingers moved through the familiar motions of braiding and pinning, creating the elaborate style Vivian demanded for tonight's gathering. The Luna would descend those grand stairs looking radiant, would smile sweetly at Alpha Callum Warwick when he returned from patrol, would charm the visiting dignitaries with her wit and warmth, and Ashlyn would remain invisible as she had learned to be. The memory came unbidden, as it often did in moments of pain. She was 14 again, crouched in the corner of a small cabin while shadows moved through the darkness outside. Her mother's hand pressed against her mouth, muffling any sound. "Stay quiet, little wolf," Marianne Thorne had whispered, amber eyes so like Ashlyn's own, bright with terror. "No matter what happens, you survive. Promise me." Ashlyn had nodded, tears streaming down her face as she made a promise she would spend the next 10 years keeping. The rogues had come in the deep hours before dawn. 8 of them, their scents wrong and wild, carrying the stench of madness and blood. It had been winter, 15 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that made your breath freeze in your lungs. Daniel Thorne had shifted immediately, his brown wolf launching toward the door with a snarl that shook the rafters. Marianne had followed, white fur erupting across her skin as she joined her mate in desperate defense. Ashlyn had tried to shift for the first time that night, had felt her wolf surge forward, desperate to protect, to fight, to survive. But the sight of her father's throat being torn open, her mother's agonized howl as she fell, it had shattered something fundamental inside her. The transformation had ceased halfway through. Pain exploded through every nerve as her body tried and failed to complete the change. Her bones began to shift, then locked. First started to erupt, then retreated. Her wolf screamed inside her head, trapped behind walls of trauma too severe for a 14-year-old mind to process. The rogues had left her there, thinking her just another human casualty. Not worth the effort. She had lain among the bodies of her parents until dawn broke cold and merciless over the Cascade Range. Her wolf trapped and screaming inside her, blocked by a pain she couldn't survive and couldn't escape. For 3 days, she had wandered half mad with grief and hunger until she collapsed near the walls of Stonehaven's main lodge. Mabel Hart had found her. The old cook had been gathering wild herbs in the forest when she stumbled upon the girl's unconscious form. Most would have seen just another orphaned human, but Mabel's keen eyes had caught the amber tint in Ashlyn's eyes, had recognized the faint scent of wolf beneath the dirt and blood. "Poor lamb," Mabel had murmured, gathering Ashlyn into surprisingly strong arms. "What horrors have you seen?" The cook had smuggled her into the kitchens, had fed her broth and bread, had asked no questions when Ashlyn remained silent for weeks. Eventually the girl had spoken, had shared the truth in broken whispers. She had a wolf, but it was trapped inside her. Unreachable. Broken. "Best not to mention that to anyone, dear," Mabel had advised gently. "Shifters who can't shift proper, they're treated worse than humans who never had the gift. Safer for everyone to think you're just a foundling without a wolf at all." So Ashlyn had become invisible. She worked in the kitchens for 6 years, silent and efficient, learning to read the moods of the territory's inhabitants. learning to anticipate needs before they were spoken, learning to survive. She had been 20 when everything changed. It was the spring of her 6th year at Stonehaven when Alpha Callum Warwick married Vivian Ashford. The union had been political, everyone knew that. The Ashford territory controlled valuable trade routes through the northern mountains. Their alliance strengthened Stonehaven's position against rival packs. The Alpha had done his duty as leaders always did. Vivian had arrived like a winter storm wrapped in silk and smiles. Within months, the staff had learned to tread carefully around her, but she saved her cruelest treatment for those who could not fight back, who had no power to challenge her. The incident that sealed Ashlyn's fate had been absurdly simple. Alpha Callum had returned early from a border patrol, striding into the kitchens with dust on his boots and weariness in the set of his broad shoulders. His dark hair had been tied back, revealing the strong line of his jaw beneath his neat beard. His gray eyes had swept the room with the natural authority of a leader assessing his domain. For 3 seconds, just 3, his gaze had landed on Ashlyn as she bent over a cutting board. Their eyes had met. Something in his expression had shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or simply curiosity about the quiet kitchen girl with the unusual amber eyes who moved like a ghost through his territory. 3 heartbeats that changed everything. Vivian had been standing in the doorway, had witnessed that brief exchange, and her pretty face had gone cold as mountain ice. The Luna had smiled at her husband, had taken his arm with practiced grace, but her ice-blue eyes had found Ashlyn across the room, and in them was a promise of pain. The next morning, Vivian had demanded that the girl with the odd eyes be reassigned as her personal attendant. That had been 4 years, 9 months, and 12 days ago. Mabel had tried to intervene once, 3 years into Ashlyn's service. The old cook had gone to guard. Captain Dalton had whispered concerns about the suspicious injuries that kept appearing on the Luna's attendant. Dalton had been a good man, honest, the kind of guard who actually cared about justice. He had vanished the next day, reassigned to the most dangerous border post in Stonehaven territory. He'd lasted 4 weeks before a rogue attack left him dead. A young servant girl named Annie, barely 16, who had been friendly with Ashlyn, who had once snuck her extra bread, had disappeared entirely shortly after. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever given. The message had been clear: interfere and people died. So Mabel had learned to offer what help she could in secret. Extra food hidden in Ashlyn's sleeping quarters. Healing salves left where she would find them. Silent companionship in the pre-dawn hours when Ashlyn's duties allowed her brief moments of respite. It was the only kindness Ashlyn knew in a world that had forgotten her. There, Vivian said, admiring herself in the mirror. Adequate work, I suppose. Now fetch my sapphire gown, the one with the silver embroidery. Yes, my lady. Ashlyn moved to the wardrobe, each step measured and careful. Her arms still burned where the iron had seared her skin, but she had learned long ago how to function through pain, how to hide the trembling in her hands, the tears that threatened when the abuse became too much to bear. Inside her chest, something stirred. Her wolf, trapped and silent for 10 years. It pressed against the cage of her trauma, howled soundlessly, desperate for freedom, yearning to break through the barriers that kept it chained. But Ashlyn pushed it down as she always did. The world had no place for broken shifters, no mercy for those who couldn't complete their transformation. Better to be thought human and powerless than to reveal her defect and face worse scorn. She had made a promise to her mother all those years ago in the darkness, a vow whispered with her last breath: survive no matter the crunch, so she would endure another night, another day, another year if necessary. She pulled the sapphire gown from its hanger and turned back to her tormentor, carefully blank expression firmly in place. Vivian was already humming, pleased with herself, anticipating the evening ahead, where she would shine as the perfect Luna, while her husband remained blind to the monster he had married. And Ashlyn would be there, invisible in the shadows, bearing her scars in silence. The evening gathering proceeded exactly as expected. Vivian descended the grand staircase like a vision in sapphire silk. Visiting alphas and their mates filled the great hall, drawn by promises of trade negotiations and territorial agreements. Wine flowed. Food appeared in endless succession from Mabel's kitchens, and Ashlyn stood in the corner, ready to attend to Vivian's needs, seen by everyone and noticed by no one, until everything went wrong. It started with the dress. Vivian had insisted on a final adjustment before entering the hall, had demanded Ashlyn tighten the lacing at the back, and when Ashlyn had complied, the Luna had suddenly gasped. You pulled too hard. The fabric is tearing. Ashlyn's hands had stilled immediately. She hadn't pulled hard at all. The fabric was intact, But Vivian was already reaching back, her fingers finding the seam, and the sound of tearing silk filled the small antechamber. Vivian had done it herself. Ashlyn knew this with absolute certainty, had seen the deliberate movement, the calculated tear. "You ruined it," Vivian hissed, her voice low enough that no passing guest would hear. "You clumsy, worthless creature. This gown cost more than your miserable life. My lady, I can mend it." Silence. The word cracked through the air like a whip. Then Vivian's hand was in her hair, yanking Ashlyn's head back with vicious force. "You think I don't see what you are?" the Luna whispered, her beautiful face twisted with something dark and hungry. "What you've always been, a threat." Ashlyn's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. "Please, I've done nothing. You exist. That's enough." The first strike of the leather strap caught Ashlyn across the shoulders, tearing through her thin dress and splitting skin. She gasped more from shock than pain. Vivian had beaten her before many times, but never this brazen, never this careless about leaving marks that might be seen. The Luna was losing control, and that terrified Ashlyn more than the beating itself. The second strike landed across her back. The third wrapped around her ribs. And something inside Ashlyn, something that had been dormant and compliant for nearly 5 years, finally snapped. Her hand shot out instinctively, catching Vivian's wrist mid-swing. For one breathless moment, they stared at each other. The Luna shocked that her victim had dared to fight back. Ashlyn equally stunned by her own audacity. "Let go of me," Vivian snarled. Instead, Ashlyn pushed. Not hard, not violently, but enough to break free of the Luna's grip. Enough to make Vivian stumble backward. And Vivian, ever the actress, let herself fall. The Luna hit the floor with a theatrical cry, one hand flying to her head as if she'd been struck. The leather strap landed perfectly in Ashlyn's trembling fingers, placed there by Vivian's quick movements, though any observer would swear the servant had been wielding it all along. "Guards!" Vivian's scream carried through the corridors, cutting through the music and conversation in the great hall. "Help! She's attacking me!" Heavy boots thundered up the stairs. The door burst open, revealing 3 guards with weapons drawn. Their eyes swept the scene, their Luna on the floor, tears streaming down her perfect face, a visible red mark blooming on her cheek where she'd scratched herself during the fall. And Ashlyn standing over her with the strap still clutched in her hand and blood dripping down her back. The evidence was clear. The story already written. "Seize her," the lead guard commanded. Ashlyn didn't fight as rough hands grabbed her arms. What would be the point? She had attacked the Luna. That's what everyone would believe, what the law would recognize. And the punishment for such a crime was death. As they dragged her toward the dungeons, Ashlyn caught a glimpse of Mabel in the corridor. The old cook's face had gone pale, her weathered hands pressed to her mouth in horror. Their eyes met for one brief moment. Ashlyn tried to convey everything she couldn't say aloud. "Thank you for your kindness. Don't intervene, save yourself." Then the darkness of the dungeon stairs swallowed her whole. The drums of war had finally silenced along the northern border, leaving Callum Warwick with nothing but the weight of victory and the hollowness that always followed battle. 3 weeks ahead of schedule, he guided his warriors back through the mountain passes toward home, eager to wash the stench of death from his skin and sleep in his own bed for the first time in months. The setting sun painted the stone walls of Stonehaven in shades of amber and gold as they approached. Beautiful, he supposed, though beauty had become a foreign concept during 5 years of a marriage that felt more like a political contract than a union of souls. Vivian would be there playing the dutiful Luna, and he would play the returning hero. They had both become exceptional actors. What Callum didn't expect was the scream that echoed through the lodge corridors as he dismounted in the courtyard. His wolf surged forward, alert and aggressive. Something was wrong. Guards appeared at the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral, but their sense carrying traces of unease. "Alpha," one of them said, bowing. "There's been an incident. Your presence is required immediately." Callum's jaw tightened. Vivian had a habit of causing drama whenever he returned from campaign. Usually some elaborate scheme to secure his attention or sympathy. "What kind of incident?" "The Luna was attacked by one of her servants. The girl is in the dungeons awaiting your judgment." His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin. "Attacked? How severely?" "A mark on her face, some bruising. Nothing that requires a healer's immediate attention." The guard paused and something in his expression shifted. "But Alpha, you should see the servant girl before you make your judgment. There are inconsistencies." That was unusual. Guards didn't question pack law lightly, and the law in this matter was crystal clear. A servant raising a hand against the Luna was punishable by immediate execution. No trial, no appeal, no mercy. It was one of the oldest laws designed to protect pack leadership from those who might abuse positions of service. Very well, take me to the dungeons first. The cell was dark lit only by a single torch that cast dancing shadows across damp stone walls. The girl sat in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, and for a moment Callum couldn't see her clearly. Then she lifted her head and amber eyes caught the firelight. Recognition hit him with unexpected force. The kitchen girl from years ago. The one with the unusual eyes. The one Vivian had requested as her personal servant shortly after their marriage. He'd barely thought of her since that day. Had assumed she'd been treated well in the Luna service. The assumption shattered the moment he truly looked at her. "Stand up," he commanded, his alpha voice carrying automatic authority. The girl rose slowly, each movement stiff with obvious pain. Her dress was torn and soaked with blood, fresh wounds across her shoulders and back that hadn't been treated. But it was the other marks that made Callum's breath catch in his throat. His eyes caught the damage on her exposed arms, not fresh but layered. Some burns had the precision of deliberate placement, others the ragged edges of cuts left untreated. Years of suffering written in scar tissue that told a story no alpha should ignore. His wolf surged forward, snarling with protective rage that had no business existing for a stranger accused of attacking his Luna. But the instinct was undeniable, overwhelming, a recognition that went deeper than logic. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Ashlyn Alpha." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse with exhaustion, or tears, or both. Ashlyn Thorne. The name triggered a memory, a report from 10 years ago. Orphan found near the border. Parents killed by rogues. Brought into service by Mabel Hart. Assumed to be human, no wolf detected. And you attacked my Luna. I? Ashlyn swallowed hard and Callum watched her throat work around the words. "I pushed her when she struck me. I didn't mean to make her fall. I just wanted her to stop." The honesty in her admission caught him off guard. A guilty person would have denied everything, would have pleaded innocence or claimed self-defense more forcefully. But this girl simply stated the facts as if she'd already accepted her fate and saw no point in fighting it. "Show me your back," he said quietly. "All of it." Ashlyn hesitated, shame and fear warring in her expression. But she obeyed. She turned and let the ruined dress fall forward, exposing skin marked by what must have been years of torture. Fresh welts from tonight's beating crossed over older scars. Burn marks in precise patterns, as if someone had pressed hot metal to her flesh repeatedly. Cuts that had healed without proper treatment. The distinctive parallel lines left by a whip used more than once. Many more than once. Something dark and furious uncoiled in Callum's chest. A growl rumbled in his throat before he could stop it, low threatening, the sound of violence barely leashed. His eyes flashed gold as his wolf fought for dominance, desperate to protect this girl whose wounds spoke of cruelty that made even a hardened warrior's blood run cold. Ashlyn stumbled backward, her amber eyes going wide with pure terror. She hit the wall and slid down, arms coming up to shield her head in a gesture that spoke of long conditioning. She expected violence from figures of authority, expected pain from those with power. That broke something in Callum's chest. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, forcing his wolf back down, making his voice as gentle as he knew how. "Ashlyn, look at me. I'm not going to hurt you." She peeked at him through her arms, trembling, and Callum saw what he should have seen years ago. A victim who'd survived through silence, who'd learned that submission was the only path to staying alive. "Tell me everything," he said softly, "and this time I'll listen." So Ashlyn told him, not just about the beatings and burns, the starvation and isolation, but about the 10 years before that, about parents who'd loved her, who'd tried to protect her from rogues in the night, about watching them die while her wolf screamed to be freed, only to seize halfway through transformation and trap itself behind walls of trauma she couldn't break down. "Mabel found me 3 days later," Ashlyn said quietly. "I was half dead, barely conscious. She took me in, gave me work in the kitchens, told me to hide what I was because shifters who can't shift proper are treated worse than humans who never had the gift." Callum's jaw clenched. She was right, and that truth shamed him. Pack hierarchy was built on strength, and those perceived as weak were often cast aside or abused. He'd never questioned that structure until now, until he saw its consequences written across this girl's skin. "And then Vivian requested you as her personal attendant." "Yes, because you looked at me once, Alpha. Just once for maybe 3 seconds when you came to the kitchens after a patrol 5 years ago. She saw it and decided I was a threat." Callum remembered that day vaguely. He'd been exhausted, hungry, looking for something quick before dealing with paperwork. He'd noticed the quiet girl with unusual eyes and thought nothing more of it. 3 heartbeats that had sealed this girl's fate for nearly 5 years. She was wrong, he said roughly. You were never a threat to her position. I barely even remembered you existed. Something painful flickered across Ashlyn's face. I know. That's what made it worse, I think. She destroyed me for years over a glance that meant nothing. Callum stood abruptly, needing to move before his control shattered completely. He walked to the barred window, staring out at the mountains beyond. You're not going to die today. The execution is canceled. You're being placed under protective custody while I investigate these claims fully. Alpha, that's not a request, Ashlyn. It's an order. He turned back to her, forcing his voice to gentle despite the fury churning in his gut. You have legal standing as a pack member. I'm going to use that to buy time for a proper investigation. But the Luna, Callum interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is going to answer some very difficult questions. And she's going to do it without knowing you're the one who provided testimony. Ashlyn stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. You believe me? Yes. The word came out with absolute certainty. I've seen enough evidence to know you're telling the truth. What I don't know yet is the full extent of what's been happening in my own territory while I've been blind to it. He called for Ronan, who arrived within moments. Take her to the guest quarters in the East Wing. The comfortable ones, not the cells. Post guards at her door, but make it clear they're there for her protection, not imprisonment. She's to be treated as an honored guest, not a prisoner. Yes, Alpha. And send for Mabel. I want her testimony recorded officially. After they left, Callum stood alone in his chambers, staring at the wedding portrait on his wall. Vivian smiled out from the canvas, beautiful and cold as winter ice. For 5 years, he'd been married to a monster, and he'd never even noticed. Ronan descended the dungeon stairs 2 hours before dawn, carrying a torch that cast wavering shadows across stone walls. He'd served the Warwick family for 15 years, long enough to develop instincts about when something didn't add up. And tonight, nothing about this situation felt right. The girl sat exactly where Callum had left her, knees drawn to her chest, amber eyes reflecting the torchlight when she looked up. She didn't flinch at his approach, didn't scramble backward or plead for mercy, just watched him with the wary stillness of someone who had learned long ago that begging accomplished nothing. The Alpha ordered a healer to examine you, Ronan said, unlocking the cell door. But I wanted to speak with you first. Off the record. Ashlyn tilted her head slightly. Why? Because I've been beta to this pack long enough to recognize when evidence doesn't match the crime. He stepped inside, keeping his distance to avoid spooking her. Your injuries are fresh. The Lunas are superficial. Yet you're the one facing execution. That's how the law works, Ashlyn said quietly. Servants don't strike their betters regardless of provocation. Provocation. In the firelight, Ronan cataloged what Callum had seen. The burns matched heated metal, consistent size, repeated pattern. The whip marks told their own story, regular intervals. Methodical application. This wasn't rage. This was routine. Tell me about these scars. The old ones. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then so softly he almost missed it. What does it matter? I'll be dead by morning anyway. It matters because I've served this pack since before you were born, girl, and I've never known Alpha Callum to execute someone without being certain of their guilt. He's ordered the healer to document your injuries. That's not standard procedure. That's an Alpha looking for reasons to question his own judgment. Something flickered in Ashlyn's expression. Hope, perhaps, or simply disbelief that anyone in power might actually care about the truth. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. If I tell you, she whispered, and nothing changes, then I've betrayed my silence for nothing. But if I stay quiet, then I die having never spoken my truth. She looked up at him, amber eyes bright with unshed tears. Which way leads to less regret, Beta Ronan? The truth always leads to less regret, even when it hurts. So Ashlyn told him everything. She spoke of 4 years, 9 months, and 12 days of systematic torture, of burns and cuts and beatings that came whenever Vivian felt threatened or bored or simply cruel. She described how the Luna's mask never slipped in public, how witnesses were silenced through threats or disappearances, how isolation had become her only protection against worse abuse. She saw the Alpha look at me once. Ashlyn said, her voice hollow with exhausted honesty. Just once 5 years ago for maybe 3 seconds, and she decided I was a threat that needed to be broken. Ronan's jaw clenched. He'd suspected Vivian was cold, calculating, more interested in power than partnership. But this level of systematic cruelty spoke to something darker than mere political ambition. Why didn't you report this? Surely someone... Mabel tried once, 3 years ago. Ashlyn's fingers dug into her arms. The guard she spoke to was transferred to the most dangerous border post the next day. Guard Captain Dalton. He died within a month. A servant girl named Annie who'd shown me kindness disappeared that same night. Never found. The names hit Ronan like physical blows. He remembered Dalton. Good man. Honest. The transfer orders had come directly from the Luna's office citing territorial needs. And Annie, 16 years old, vanished without a trace 3 years ago. The investigation had gone nowhere. The message was clear, Ashlyn continued. Speak up and people die. So I stayed silent and survived. There's something else, she added, her voice dropping even lower. Something I've never told anyone except Mabel, and she only knows because she found me when I first came here. Ronan waited, sensing they were approaching the heart of whatever mystery surrounded this girl. I'm not human, Ashlyn said. I have a wolf. I've always had one. But it's been trapped inside me since I was 14 years old. Since the night rogues murdered my parents and I watched them die. The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with years of silence and shame. I tried to shift that night, she continued, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Tried to transform to fight to save them. But the trauma was too severe. My body began to change and then seized halfway through, the most agonizing pain I've ever felt. My wolf got stuck, trapped behind the fear and grief. I've never been able to complete a transformation since. Ronan's breath caught. A shifter with a blocked wolf was rare, tragic, and according to pack prejudice, considered defective. Such individuals were treated worse than humans who'd never had the gift at all. No wonder she'd hidden it. Why tell me this now? Because if I have a confirmed wolf, even a broken one, I have legal rights a human servant doesn't. Ashlyn lifted her chin with fragile dignity. Maybe not enough to save my life, but enough to demand a proper investigation. And maybe, just maybe, that investigation will reveal what the Luna really is beneath her pretty mask. Clever girl, Ronan thought with grudging admiration. Even facing death, she was thinking strategically, trying to protect others from suffering the same fate. If I can prove you have a wolf, he said slowly, everything changes. You'd have the right to challenge the Luna's account, to demand trial by combat if you chose. But I need evidence, and I need it before dawn. The healer will be able to sense it. Blocked doesn't mean absent, just unreachable. Ronan rose to his feet, decision crystallizing. Stay here. Say nothing to anyone else until I return. He left the cell and immediately sought out others who'd worked near the Luna's chambers. The late hour worked in his favor. Tired servants were more likely to speak honestly, less afraid when darkness provided cover. A young maid named Clara admitted she'd seen Ashlyn appear with fresh injuries multiple times. But we were told the girl was clumsy, my lord. Accidents happen. An older steward reluctantly confirmed that food orders for the Luna's chambers never included portions for the personal attendant, despite custom dictating that servants ate when their mistresses did. I thought it strange, but it wasn't my place to question the Luna's household management. And then there was Mabel. Ronan found the old cook in her kitchen, grinding herbs with mechanical precision, though her weathered face was pale with distress. You know about the girl in the dungeons, Ronan said. It wasn't a question. Mabel's hand stilled. Ashlyn, her name is Ashlyn. Tell me what you know. The story that emerged painted a picture of sustained abuse that made Ronan's wolf snarl with protective rage. Mabel had found Ashlyn a decade ago, half dead from grief and trauma, and had given the orphaned girl sanctuary. She'd watched helplessly as Vivian systematically destroyed that same girl over years of service. I tried to help once, Mabel whispered, tears tracking down her lined cheeks. 3 years ago, went to guard Captain Dalton, told him Ashlyn was being hurt. Next day, Dalton was transferred to the northern post. Died within a month. And Annie, sweet Annie, who used to sneak Ashlyn extra bread, she vanished that same night. Never found. Her voice broke. The Luna made it clear. Interfere and more people would suffer. So I stayed silent and hated myself for it. That ends tonight, Ronan promised. The healer arrived as the first gray light of pre-dawn began to filter through the high dungeon windows. Dr. Evelyn Reeves was an older woman skilled in both medicine and the subtle energies that govern shifter physiology. Her examination of Ashlyn was thorough and conducted in tense silence while Ronan watched from the cell entrance. Well, he demanded when she finally stepped back. The healer's expression was grim. The physical injuries are extensive and show clear patterns of repeated trauma over years. Burns cuts evidence of malnutrition and systematic abuse. She paused, then added quietly, and there's something else. This girl has a wolf. Ashlyn's eyes widened in shock as if even she hadn't quite believed it would be detectable. The wolf is blocked, Dr. Reeves continued, trapped behind severe psychological trauma. But it's there, strong and vital, pressing against barriers this girl erected to protect herself from pain she couldn't process. She looked at Ronan with absolute certainty. She is a shifter beta, just one who's been unable to complete her transformation. Everything changed in that moment. Pack law was absolute about one thing: shifters had rights that humans did not. Ashlyn wasn't just a servant who'd attacked the Luna. She was a pack member with a confirmed wolf, entitled to proper investigation. The possibility of trial by combat if she chose to challenge her accuser. Ronan wasted no time. He gathered his evidence, the testimonies, the healer's findings, the documentation of Ashlyn's injuries, and carried it directly to Callum's chambers as the sun broke over the mountains. The Alpha was already awake, staring out his window, with the look of a man who'd spent the night wrestling with impossible decisions. He turned as Ronan entered, and his gray eyes were stormy with barely contained emotion. "Tell me you found something," Callum said. "Tell me there's a reason to question what seems obvious." "There are dozens of reasons, Alpha." Ronan laid out everything he'd discovered, watching his friend's expression darken with each revelation. "The girl has been tortured for years. Multiple witnesses confirm it. And the healer has confirmed she's a shifter with a blocked wolf, which means she has legal rights we cannot ignore." Callum's hands clenched into fists. "Bring her to my private chambers, not the audience hall. I want no witnesses to this conversation until I understand exactly what's been happening in my own territory." When Ashlyn was brought before him an hour later, washed and dressed in clean clothes, but still bearing the evidence of her injuries, Callum forced himself to truly see her. Not as a servant, not as an accused criminal, but as a person who might have been failed by everyone around her, including him. "Show me," he commanded, his voice rough. "Show me everything the Luna did to you." Ashlyn hesitated, shame warring with self-preservation in her amber eyes. But she obeyed. She removed the simple tunic she'd been given to reveal skin marked by years of calculated cruelty. Fresh welts from the previous night's beating crossed over old scars. Burn patterns that spoke of hot iron deliberately pressed to flesh. Cuts that had been inflicted with precision rather than passion. The evidence of torture that had been methodical and sustained. Callum's wolf surged beneath his skin, but he controlled it this time. Kept his voice steady. "How long?" he asked. "Nearly 5 years, Alpha." 5 years. The entire duration of her service to Vivian. The entire span of his marriage. "And you never spoke of this to anyone." Ashlyn pulled her dress back up, turning to face him again. There was no accusation in her amber eyes. Only resignation. "Who would have believed me, Alpha? I'm just a servant. She's the Luna. And pack law is clear about our respective positions." She was right, and that truth burned worse than any wound. "The law is also clear about your crime tonight." Callum said, his voice cold because his wolf was too close to the surface, too angry to trust himself with warmth. "But you have a confirmed wolf, which means you have legal rights regardless of what happened." He stood abruptly, needing to move before his control shattered completely. He walked to the window, staring out at the mountains beyond. "You're not going to die today. The execution is canceled. You're being placed under protective custody while I investigate these claims fully." "Alpha, that's not a request, Ashlyn. It's an order." He turned back to her, forcing his voice to gentle despite the fury churning in his gut. "I'm going to find the truth, and she's going to answer for what she did." Ashlyn stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "You believe me?" "Yes." The word came out with absolute certainty. "I've seen enough evidence to know you're telling the truth. What I don't know yet is the full extent of what's been happening in my own territory while I've been blind to it." He called for Ronan, who arrived within moments. "Take her to the guest quarters in the East Wing. The comfortable ones, not the cells. Post guards at her door, but make it clear they're there for her protection, not imprisonment. She's to be treated as an honored guest, not a prisoner." "Yes, Alpha." After they left, Callum stood alone in his chambers, staring at the wedding portrait on his wall. Vivian smiled out from the canvas, beautiful and cold, and absolutely convincing. For 5 years, he'd been married to a monster, and he'd never even noticed. The rage that burned through him was volcanic, barely contained beneath years of alpha discipline. But rage wouldn't serve him now. He needed to be methodical, strategic, build a case so airtight that even Vivian's father couldn't dispute it. Because this wasn't just about justice for Ashlyn anymore. This was about what kind of alpha he was going to be, and what kind of pack he was going to lead. The letter arrived with the morning sun carried by riders bearing the Ashford crest. 3 horses foam-flecked and exhausted. The seal was blood-red wax pressed with Alpha Brennan Ashford's personal insignia. Callum broke it open with steady hands, while Ronan watched, both knowing what it would contain before the parchment unrolled. The words were diplomatic, polite even, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. Alpha Warwick news has reached me of an incident involving my daughter, Luna Vivian of Stonehaven. I trust this matter will be resolved swiftly and appropriately as befits both our territories' honor. I expect either the execution of the guilty party or substantial compensation, 50,000 silver, within 5 days of this letter's arrival. The offense against a Luna of Ashford blood demands no less. Failure to comply will be interpreted as disrespect to our alliance. Trade agreements will be suspended. Military support withdrawn. I'm certain you understand the implications. Respectfully, Alpha Brennan Ashford. Callum set the letter down with deliberate care. He's threatening war without saying the word directly, Ronan observed, because he knows I can't afford open conflict right now. The northern border is still recovering from the last campaign. Our warriors need rest, not another battle. Callum's jaw tightened. But I also can't execute an innocent woman or pay blood money for crimes she didn't commit. What will you do? Force their hand before they force mine. Callum's gray eyes were hard as mountainstone. We have 5 days. In 5 days, I need evidence so ironclad that even Brennan Ashford can't dispute it without exposing himself as complicit. The testimonies we have won't be enough. Vivian will claim servants are lying to protect one of their own, that we fabricated evidence to avoid payment. Callum stood pacing to the window. We need something undeniable, a pattern that proves this isn't an isolated incident. Ronan was quiet for a moment, then said, if Vivian did this here, she may have done it before, in her father's territory. Send an emissary, quietly. Find anyone who served in the Ashford household before Vivian married me. Anyone who might have concerns about how she treated staff. That could take weeks. We don't have weeks, we have 5 days. Callum turned back to his beta. Use every contact we have in Ashford territory. Offer protection, new identities if necessary. Someone out there knows the truth. Find them. Ronan nodded once and left. Callum stood alone in his study, staring at the letter that promised consequences for choosing justice over convenience. 5 years ago, he'd made a choice. Married for alliance rather than love. Duty over desire. Political stability over personal happiness. He'd told himself it was the right decision. The mature decision. What a good alpha would do for his pack. Now he wondered how many other right decisions had blinded him to wrong realities. The emissary returned on the 3rd day. Callum had spent those 72 hours in careful preparation, gathering every scrap of evidence, having Dr. Reeves document each of Ashlyn's injuries with meticulous detail, recording testimonies from 7 servants, all corroborating the pattern of abuse. But it wasn't enough, not yet. Then Ronan's rider came back and he wasn't alone. The woman who entered Callum's study was thin-worn with the look of someone who'd spent years running from something. Her hands trembled as she accepted the tea Mabel brought, but her eyes were steady. Determined. This is Nora Bishop, Ronan said, though that's not the name she was born with. Nora Glenn, the woman corrected quietly. I changed it 5 years ago when I fled Ashford territory. Been living under the new name ever since, terrified someone would find me. Callum leaned forward. You served in the Ashford household as Lady Vivian's personal maid for 8 months. Nora set down her teacup and Callum saw the scars on her wrists, old, healed poorly, until I couldn't take it anymore and ran. Tell me what happened. Nora's testimony came slowly at first, then faster, as if a dam had broken inside her. She described the same patterns Ashlyn had endured. Burns from heated styling implements, whippings for imagined slights, starvation as punishment, the systematic isolation that made it impossible to seek help. She had a branding iron, Nora said, her voice hollow, shaped like the Ashford rose, her family crest. She said it marked the property. The woman pulled back her sleeve, revealing a scar on her inner forearm. The distinctive pattern was unmistakable. I still have the mark. Callum's wolf snarled beneath his skin. The rage was becoming harder to contain. Why didn't you report this? I tried. Nora's hands clenched. Went to one of the senior guards, showed him my injuries, begged for help. Her voice dropped. 2 days later, I found out that guard had been reassigned to the most dangerous patrol route. And the cook, who'd been kind to me, who'd given me extra food when the Luna was starving me, she disappeared the same night. Just gone. The pattern was identical to what had happened at Stonehaven. Dalton transferred. Annie vanished. So I ran, Nora continued. Middle of the night, took nothing but the clothes on my back, changed my name, moved 3 territories away. Been looking over my shoulder for 5 years, terrified she'd send someone after me. Why come forward now? Nora met his eyes. Because your emissary said there was another girl. That she's been suffering what I suffered but for longer. And that maybe this time, someone would actually believe the truth. Her voice broke. I couldn't save myself 5 years ago. But maybe I can help save her. Ronan set a document on Callum's desk. Medical records from Ashford Territory dated 5 years ago. They confirmed Nora's injuries. And letters from her family asking where she'd gone, why she left so suddenly. Callum studied the evidence piece by piece. The documentation was thorough, the pattern undeniable. Vivian hadn't started her cruelty at Stonehaven. She'd brought it with her. I need you to testify, Callum said to Nora. Formally, before the Council of Elders and potentially before a public hearing. Fear flickered across her face. She'll kill me. She won't touch you. You have my word as Alpha. You'll be under Stonehaven's protection for as long as you need it. Nora was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. All right, if it helps that other girl, Ashlyn, you said, then I'll do it. After she left with Ronan to have her testimony formally recorded, Callum sat alone with the weight of what he'd discovered. 2 victims, 2 territories. The exact same pattern of abuse. How many others were there? How many women had Vivian destroyed before someone finally stopped her? The thought made him sick. He found himself walking to the guest quarters that evening, drawn by an instinct he didn't fully understand. Ashlyn sat by the window, a book in her lap that she wasn't reading, just staring out at the mountains backlit by the setting sun. She looked small in the comfortable chair, fragile. But there was steel beneath that fragility, a core of strength that 5 years of torture hadn't managed to break. May I come in? He asked from the doorway. She startled, then nodded. It's your territory, Alpha. You don't need my permission. I'm asking anyway. Something shifted in her expression, surprise perhaps, or the tentative beginning of trust. Callum entered, settling into the chair across from her. Careful to maintain distance so she wouldn't feel trapped or threatened. We found someone, he said, another of Vivian's victims, from before she came to Stonehaven. Ashlyn's amber eyes widened. There were others, at least one, a woman named Nora who served as Vivian's maid 5 years ago. She suffered the same abuse you did, the same patterns, the same tactics to silence anyone who tried to help. What happened to her? She ran, changed her name, has been hiding ever since, terrified Vivian would find her. Callum leaned forward slightly. She's agreed to testify to help build the case against Vivian. Ashlyn's hands trembled in her lap. Why would she risk that? She's free. She escaped. Why come back? Because she knows what you've been through, and she can't save herself 5 years ago, but maybe she can help save you now. Tears spilled down Ashlyn's cheeks, silent and unchecked. Callum had the sudden, overwhelming urge to reach out, to comfort her, to promise that everything would be all right. But he kept his hands to himself. She'd been hurt by people in power for too long. The last thing she needed was another Alpha touching her without permission. Tell me about your parents, he said instead. Not how they died, how they lived. Ashlyn blinked, surprised by the question. Then slowly she began to speak. She told him about her father's patience, how Daniel Thorne had taught her to track by scent when she was barely 6 years old. They'd spent hours in the forest, and he never got frustrated when she made mistakes. She told him about her mother's singing, how Marianne would hum old pack songs while she worked, melodies passed down through generations. The cottage had always smelled like pine needles and fresh bread. They loved each other, Ashlyn said softly. Really loved each other. Not like political marriages or duty. They chose each other every day. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, neither quite acknowledged. Callum thought about his own marriage, cold and distant, a contract signed and filed away. Vivian in her chambers, him in his, appearing together at functions with practiced smiles. They'd never chosen each other. Not once. You deserve to have that, he said quietly. A family, love, safety, all the things that were stolen from you. I had it for 14 years. Some people never get that much. And you've spent the last 10 years surviving without it. Ashlyn met his eyes. Survival is all I know anymore. Then maybe it's time to learn something else. The sun had set fully now, the room lit only by lamplight, golden and warm, creating an intimacy that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Callum stood knowing he should leave before he said something he couldn't take back. But at the door he paused. Ashlyn, yes, Alpha, you are not just a responsibility to me. I need you to know that. Her breath caught. What am I then? Everything, his wolf whispered. Mine. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Not while he was still legally bound to another woman, no matter how hollow that bond had become. Someone I care about, he said carefully, more than is probably was given the circumstances. He left before she could respond, his wolf prowling restlessly beneath his skin. The mate bond was forming. He could feel it. Tendrils of connection reaching between them, growing stronger with each conversation, each shared moment. It terrified him, and it felt more right than anything had in 5 years. The thunderstorm hit on the third night after Nora's arrival. Ashlyn woke to the sound of rain pounding against windows, thunder rumbling through the mountains like the growl of some massive beast. And suddenly she was 14 again. The rogues had come in the rain, thunder covering the sounds of them breaking down the door, lightning illuminating her father's wolf as he fought her mother's white fur stained red. The storm outside became the storm of that night, and Ashlyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't separate past from present. She was curled on the floor, arms wrapped around her head, when the door opened. Ashlyn, Callum's voice. Calm, steady, cutting through the panic like a blade through fog. Ashlyn, you're safe. You're in Stonehaven. The storm is just weather. But she couldn't respond, could only shake and gasp for air that wouldn't come. Then he was there, kneeling beside her but not touching. Just present, solid, real. Listen to my voice, he said, and the alpha command in it forced her focus to him. Feel the floor beneath you. You're not in that cabin. You're here with me, and I swear on my life that nothing will hurt you. Her amber eyes slowly found his face present, bleeding back into awareness. Callum, I'm here. He settled his back against the wall close enough that she could reach out if she wanted, but maintaining enough space that she wouldn't feel trapped. I was working in the next room when I heard your heartbeat spike. Felt your fear through the... He stopped. I knew you needed help. Through the what, Ashlyn wondered, but she was too exhausted to ask. Thunder crashed again and she flinched. Callum began talking, his voice low and steady, telling her stories about his childhood, about learning to shift for the first time and accidentally destroying his father's study, about Ronan teaching him to track when he was barely 10 years old. Anything to keep her grounded in the present, away from the memories that threatened to drown her. Gradually her breathing steadied, her trembling subsided. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't apologize. Trauma doesn't follow a schedule. You should go. You have more important things. There's nothing more important than this, than you. The words settled between them, weighted with meaning. Outside, the storm continued. But inside, Ashlyn felt something shift. She was safe. Actually, truly safe. For the first time in longer than she could remember. Will you stay? She asked, her voice small. Just until the storm passes. As long as you need me to. They sat there together in the darkness, backs against the wall, as rain hammered the windows and thunder rolled through the mountains. Callum kept talking. Stories about pack politics and border disputes and the absurdity of council meetings where old wolves argued about territorial boundaries that hadn't mattered in decades. And slowly Ashlyn realized something. She was laughing. Not much. Just small breaths of amusement. But it was the first time she'd laughed in 5 years. When dawn finally crept through the windows, the storm had passed. Callum was still there, his presence steady and warm beside her. Thank you, Ashlyn said quietly. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You didn't have to stay. You chose to. He turned to look at her, and his gray eyes held something she couldn't quite name. I'll always choose to. Remember that. Later that morning, Dr. Reeves arrived for another session. The healer had been working with Ashlyn daily using techniques designed to help trauma survivors reconnect with their blocked wolves. We're going to try something different today, Dr. Reeves said, settling into her chair. You've been focusing on the trauma itself, the night your parents died, but that's not the only memory your wolf carries. What do you mean? Your wolf existed before that night. It formed when you were young, shaped by love and safety and joy. Those memories are still there, buried beneath the pain. The healer leaned forward. Today, I want you to remember the good parts. Your parents alive, your family whole, the life you had before everything fell apart. Ashlyn's first instinct was to refuse. Remembering the good only made the loss hurt worse. But Dr. Reeves was patient, and eventually Ashlyn closed her eyes and let herself drift back. She was 6 years old, learning to track in the forest with her father. The way he'd knelt beside her, showing her how to read paw prints in the mud. His deep laugh when she'd proudly identified a rabbit trail. She was 8, watching her mother prepare dinner. The way Marianne's hands had moved with practiced grace, chopping vegetables while humming old songs. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of bread rising. She was 12, sitting between her parents by the fire, her father's arm around her shoulders, her mother's fingers combing through her hair. The absolute certainty that she was loved, protected, home. Inside her chest, something stirred. Her wolf. Not the trapped, screaming thing she'd grown accustomed to, but something older, softer, the part of her that remembered safety. Goodbye, Dr. Reeves murmured. Now reach for it, not with desperation, with love. Ashlyn's eyes flashed amber gold, claws extended from her fingertips, sharp and real. The transformation didn't seize this time, didn't lock up in panic, it just flowed. Partial, yes, incomplete, but progress. When her eyes cleared, she was shaking not from pain, but from the effort. You did it, Dr. Reeves said with satisfaction, further than ever before. Callum had been watching from the doorway. She hadn't noticed him enter, but when their eyes met across the room, something sparked between them. A recognition that went soul deep. His wolf responded to hers. She could feel it, a call and answer, a bond forming beneath conscious awareness. He stumbled back slightly, clearly shaken by the intensity. Dr. Reeves noticed but said nothing, simply gathering her supplies with a knowing expression. After the healer left, Callum remained. What was that? Ashlyn asked. I don't know. His voice was rough. But my wolf recognizes yours, even blocked, even partial. It knows you belong to, he stopped. It knows you. Is that normal? No, it's rare, very rare. They stared at each other, both understanding what neither was ready to name. Mate bond, the connection that formed between wolves destined for each other, the recognition that transcended logic or choice. But Callum was married, and Ashlyn was still healing, and the timing was impossible. We should focus on the hearing, Callum said, finally breaking the moment. It's in 2 days, everything else can wait until after. Ashlyn nodded, though her wolf howled in protest at the distance he was putting between them. Everything else could wait, but waiting didn't make it less true. The Council of Elders convened the afternoon before the public hearing. 3 ancient shifters who'd served Stonehaven for longer than most pack members had been alive. They held no official power, but their opinions carried weight. Elder Marcus Thornwick, 74, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Elder Sarah Voss, 69, whose gentle demeanor hid a mind like a steel trap. Elder Jacob Hale, 71, traditional to his bones but fair in his judgments. Callum presented the evidence methodically. Medical documentation of Ashlyn's injuries, testimonies from 7 servants, Nora's account from 5 years ago, the pattern of witnesses being silenced through death or disappearance. The elders listened in grave silence. The evidence is disturbing, Thornwick acknowledged, but we must consider the political ramifications. Vivian Ashford is Alpha Brennan's only daughter. To accuse her publicly without ironclad proof could trigger war. I have ironclad proof, Callum said. You have testimony and medical evidence, Voss corrected gently. But Vivian will claim the girl is lying, that the injuries are self-inflicted or from other sources. She'll say this is a conspiracy to remove her from power. And her father will believe her, or at least claim to, because admitting his daughter is guilty would shame his entire bloodline. Callum's hands clenched on the table. So I'm supposed to do nothing. Let her continue. We're saying you need to be strategic, Hale interrupted. Build your case carefully. Most importantly, prepare for the political fallout before you make formal accusations. This isn't just about justice for one abused girl. It's about the stability of your entire pack and the potential for war with a powerful neighbor. The words tasted like ash, but Callum recognized their wisdom. I'm holding the public hearing tomorrow night as scheduled, he said. Vivian doesn't know about Nora's testimony. She thinks she can charm her way out of this like always. When she realizes the truth is coming out, she'll panic. And when people panic, they make mistakes. And if she doesn't break, Voss asked. She will. I've seen her kind before. Narcissists wish to crumble when their masks are threatened. Callum stood. The girl Ashlyn remains under my protection regardless. She has a confirmed wolf even if blocked. That gives her legal standing. Of course, Thornwick agreed. We recommend placing her in comfortable quarters under the guise of recuperation from her injuries. Tell the Luna it's standard procedure while the incident is reviewed. It was exactly what Callum had already done, but having the elders' formal approval gave it legitimacy. After they left, Ronan entered. Vivian's been asking questions, the beta reported. She's heard rumors that you've been visiting Ashlyn daily, that you seem personally invested in her recovery. What does she know about the investigation? Not the specifics, but she's suspicious enough to start maneuvering. Ronan hesitated. Alpha, one of her attendants, was caught trying to question the guards about the evidence we've gathered. Ice flooded Callum's veins. If Vivian suspected the investigation had expanded beyond routine procedure, she'd either run or escalate. Either option was dangerous. Double the guards on Ashlyn's quarters. No one gets in or out without my explicit permission. Callum's jaw clenched. And prepare for the hearing tomorrow night. We're moving forward whether Vivian's ready or not. What if she refuses to attend? Then I'll invoke Alpha authority and drag her there myself. She doesn't get to hide anymore. After Ronan left, Callum stood alone in his study staring at his wedding portrait. In 36 hours, everything would change. Either he'd successfully expose Vivian as crimes and free Ashlyn from 5 years of torment, or he'd start a war that could destroy everything he'd built. There was no middle ground, no safe compromise, just truth or consequences. And Callum had already chosen which side he was on. That night, he visited Ashlyn one final time before the hearing. She was practicing the partial shift Dr. Reeves had taught her, eyes flashing gold and the lamplight claws extending and retracting with increasing control. You're getting stronger, he observed. The walls are cracking. I can feel my wolf closer than it's been in 10 years. She let the shift recede, turning to face him. Will it be enough for the hearing? You don't need to shift to have legal rights. The healer's confirmation is enough. That's not what I mean. Ashlyn wrapped her arms around herself. Vivian will be there, in the same room, and she'll smile that cold smile and call me a liar and make me sound crazy. She'll try, but she won't succeed. Callum crossed to her, stopping just outside arm's reach. Do you trust me? Yes, Ashlyn said without hesitation. The simple certainty in that single word made his chest tight. Then trust that I won't let her hurt you again. Whatever happens tomorrow night, you're protected. You have my word as Alpha. And as Ashlyn stopped, the unspoken word hanging between them. Mate. The bond was there now, undeniable, growing stronger every day. His wolf knew it, hers knew it, even if they couldn't act on it yet. As someone who cares about you, Callum finished carefully. More than I should, given that I'm still technically married. For now, Ashlyn said softly. For now, he agreed. They stood there in the lamplight, two wolves circling the truth they couldn't quite speak. Tomorrow night, the masks would fall, the lies would be exposed, and everything would change. But tonight, in this quiet moment, they could pretend the future was simple, that nothing stood between them but time. And time they both knew had a way of running out. The great hall filled as evening approached, packed with bodies and thick with anticipation. 300 pack members crowded into the space, drawn by rumors that something significant was about to unfold. Word had spread through Stonehaven like wildfire. The Alpha was holding a public hearing. The Luna had been attacked. A servant faced judgment, but whispers suggested there was more to the story. Callum stood at the head table with the Council of Elders, his expression carved from stone. Ronan positioned himself nearby, a stack of documents at his side. Dr. Reeves sat with the witnesses, her medical bag at her feet. Ashlyn remained in an antechamber under guard, hidden from view. Callum had insisted she stay away until the moment her testimony was needed. No reason to expose her to Vivian's venom before necessary. And Vivian. She made her entrance with perfect timing, descending the stairs in sapphire silk that matched her ice-blue eyes. Her golden hair cascaded in elaborate braids. Every inch the wronged Luna, gracious and wounded. She moved through the crowd, accepting sympathies, playing her role with practiced ease. But Callum saw what others missed. The slight tremor in her hands as she carried her wine goblet. The way her gaze darted to the guards positioned throughout the hall. She knew something was wrong, didn't know what, but her instincts were screaming danger. Good. Vivian took her seat at the head table, the Luna's traditional position to Callum's left. She smiled at him, all warmth and false affection. He didn't smile back. My lords, my ladies, Callum's voice rang out across the hall, instantly commanding silence. We gather tonight to address a matter of pack law and the responsibilities of leadership. The crowd settled, hundreds of eyes fixed on their Alpha. 5 nights ago, an incident occurred that seemed straightforward, Callum continued. My Luna was allegedly attacked by her personal attendant. Pack law regarding such crimes is clear. But what appeared simple has revealed something far more troubling. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Vivian's fingers tightened on the arms of her chair, though her face remained serene. I have spent the past 5 days investigating not just the incident, but the circumstances that led to it. He gestured to Ronan, who stepped forward with the documents. What I discovered demands justice. Alpha, surely you're not suggesting... Vivian began, her voice carrying perfect confusion and hurt. I'm not suggesting. I'm stating facts backed by evidence that will be presented to this council for formal judgment. Callum's gray eyes were cold as winter stone. But first I invoke my right to question the accused directly. Vivian's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of calculation in her eyes before she schooled her expression back to innocent bewilderment. Accused Callum, what is this really about? Her voice dropped to something hurt and vulnerable. Is it her, the servant girl you've been visiting her daily? The whole territory knows. Is this some elaborate excuse to what exposed the truth? Callum leaned forward. Tell me, Vivian, how many of your personal attendants have disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances over the years? The hall went utterly silent. Vivian's hand moved toward her wine goblet, the one she'd personally filled before sitting down when no one was watching. I don't know what you mean. The council has those numbers. Would you like me to share them? Ronan stepped forward, his voice carrying across the hall. In the 5 years since Vivian Ashford became Luna of Stonehaven, 3 personal attendants have been reassigned or disappeared. In her father's territory before that, 2 servants who worked in her household vanished without explanation. Servants leave employment all the time, Vivian said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. That proves nothing. Then let's discuss what it does prove. Callum nodded to Dr. Reeves. The healer stood, her expression grave. 5 days ago, I examined Ashlyn Thorne at the Alpha's request. My findings were disturbing. She opened her medical bag, pulling out detailed sketches and documentation. 23 thermal burns, 1st through 3rd degree, healed without treatment. 41 lacerations consistent with leather whip, various stages of scarring. 6 bone fractures that mended improperly without medical intervention. Severe malnutrition. The patient weighed 98 pounds at 5 feet 6 inches. The crowd gasped as Dr. Reeves displayed the sketches. Not just scars, a map of cruelty spanning years. Each mark dated, documented, undeniable. These injuries were not inflicted in a single incident. Dr. Reeves continued, her voice clinical, but her eyes hard. They represent years of sustained, methodical torture. Those could be from anywhere, Vivian protested, but her voice was rising now, losing its careful control. Self-inflicted even. Disturbed people do terrible things to themselves. Then how do you explain this? Ronan gestured to the antechamber door. It opened and Nora Bishop stepped through. Vivian went absolutely pale. Who is that? She whispered, though everyone could hear the fear in her voice. Nora walked to the center of the hall, her shoulders straight despite the trembling in her hands. My name is Nora Bishop. 5 years ago, I was known as Nora Glenn, and I served as personal maid to Vivian Ashford in her father's territory. Her voice shook but grew stronger with each word. I fled after 8 months because she tortured me. Burns, beatings, starvation. The same systematic cruelty she's inflicted on others. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing the distinctive scar on her inner forearm. The Ashford rose branded into flesh. She used this mark to claim ownership. Said it taught proper respect. Nora's eyes met Vivian's across the hall. When I tried to report the abuse, witnesses disappeared. A guard who'd seen my injuries was reassigned and later killed. A cook who'd shown me kindness vanished the same night. So I ran, changed my name, and have been hiding for 5 years. The crowd erupted in whispers, shock spreading like ripples through water. Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against stone. This is a conspiracy. Her voice cracked through the hall. You've paid this woman to lie, built this entire charade because you want to replace me with someone younger, more broken, easier to control. Sit down, Callum commanded with alpha authority that hit like physical force. Vivian stumbled back into her chair. Ronan, present the corroborating evidence. His beta stepped forward with more documents. Medical records from Ashford territory dated 5 years ago documenting Nora Glenn's injuries before she fled. Letters from her family asking where she'd gone, why she left so suddenly. Purchase records showing burn ointment ordered monthly for the Luna's chambers at Stonehaven. Why would a Luna need burn treatment supplies unless someone in her service was being burned regularly? He laid out each piece of evidence methodically. Food ledgers, witness testimonies, guard reports, the pattern emerging with damning clarity, and finally Mabel's testimony. The old cook stood with tears streaming down her weathered face. I tried to help 3 years ago, she said, her voice breaking. Went to guard Captain Dalton. showed him Ashlyn's injuries, begged him to intervene. She paused, grief and guilt warring in her expression. Dalton was transferred the next day to the northern border, died in a rogue attack within a month. And a young girl named Annie, 16 years old, who'd been kind to Ashlyn, she disappeared that same night. Never found. The message was clear, Mabel continued. Speak up and people died. So I stayed silent and hated myself for being a coward. The weight of her words settled over the hall like a shroud. Callum let the silence stretch, let the evidence sink in before he spoke again. The pattern is undeniable. Multiple victims across multiple territories. Witnesses silenced through death or disappearance. Years of systematic cruelty hidden behind a beautiful mask. Vivian, his hand moved to her wine goblet again, lifting it halfway to her lips. Enough talk, she said, her voice brittle. If you're going to condemn me based on lies and fabrication, then I'll... Drink it, Callum commanded with alpha authority that made even the strongest wolves in the room shift uncomfortably. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear from wine you poured yourself. Vivian froze the goblet, trembling in her hand. I'm simply not thirsty. Then you won't mind if we have it tested. He nodded to a guard who stepped forward and took the goblet from her shaking fingers. Dr. Reeves produced a small vial of clear liquid poison detector used for centuries by pack healers to protect their alphas. She added 3 drops to the wine. The liquid turned black as midnight. The crowd gasped collectively. Hemlock derivative, Dr. Reeves announced, her voice cold with professional disgust. Non-lethal dose, but enough to cause violent illness. And the chemical trace I'm detecting on her breath suggests she took an antidote approximately 2 hours ago. Understanding rippled through the hall like thunder. Vivian had planned to poison herself during the hearing, collapse in seeming proof of Ashlyn's continued vendetta, make all of Callum's evidence circumstantial against the immediate proof of attempted murder. You set a trap, Vivian whispered, staring at Callum with something between horror and rage. You knew. You've been watching me. For the past week, yes. Every movement, every conversation, every meal you prepared. Callum stood, his presence filling the hall. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate your final play? The mask shattered completely. Vivian's beautiful face twisted with fury that transformed her into something ugly and unrecognizable. You dare judge me, she screamed, all pretense of grace abandoned. I am Luna of this pack, daughter of Alpha, Brennan Ashford. That girl was nothing, a broken servant who deserved every moment of pain I gave her. The admission rang through the hall, damning in its clarity. Elder Thornwick rose from his seat, his aged face grave. But Vivian was too far gone to stop now. Years of carefully controlled cruelty erupting in one catastrophic moment. She deserved it because you looked at her. She pointed at Callum, her hand shaking with rage. 5 years ago, you looked at her for 3 seconds, and I saw it, the interest in your eyes, the way your wolf noticed something. So I took her from you. I broke her piece by piece, day by day, year by year, until there was nothing left that could threaten my position. You tortured an innocent woman for nearly 5 years because of a glance that lasted 3 heartbeats. Callum's voice was deadly quiet. You murdered servants who tried to help her. You violated every code of honor a Luna is sworn to uphold. Honor, Vivian laughed, the sound brittle and desperate. You want to talk about honor when you're clearly besotted with a former slave? This entire investigation is just you, justifying your desire to replace me with someone younger, more broken, easier to... That's enough. The new voice cut through Vivian's tirade like a blade. Every head turned toward the entrance. Alpha Brennan Ashford stood in the doorway, his silver-streaked hair and stern features marking him clearly as Vivian's father. Behind him, several Ashford warriors flanked the entrance, their presence causing immediate tension among the Stonehaven pack. Father, relief flooded Vivian's face. Thank the gods. Tell them this is madness. Tell them... I heard every word. Brennan interrupted, his voice cold as mountain stone. I arrived an hour ago and waited outside the hall to make a proper entrance. Instead, I heard my daughter confess to torture, to murder, to betrayal of the Luna's sacred duties. He walked forward, his boots echoing in the absolute silence. I heard her admit to years of systematic cruelty, to silencing witnesses through death, to attempting poisoning and fraud. He stopped before the head table, and for the first time he looked at Vivian directly. His expression held nothing but cold disappointment. You are no child of mine. Father, no, Vivian's voice cracked. You can't mean... The Ashford family hereby severs all ties with Vivian Ashford Warwick. We disavow her actions, her crimes, and her very existence. Brennan turned to Callum, his face like carved granite. She speaks only for herself, not for our territory or our bloodline. The political maneuvering was brilliant in its cruelty. By disowning Vivian publicly, Brennan saved his family's reputation and eliminated any justification for war. He'd sacrificed his daughter to protect his territory's standing. Vivian stood frozen, betrayed by the very father she'd relied on to shield her from consequences. "You're abandoning me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You abandoned honor. You abandoned decency. You brought shame upon everything our family stands for." Brennan's voice was flat, final. "Whatever happens to you now, you've earned it." Elder Voss rose with grave formality. "Vivian Ashford, formerly of Stonehaven, this council finds you guilty of systematic abuse of a pack member, of murder through negligence and intent, of violation of the Luna's code of honor, and of attempted poisoning with a malicious intent." The elder's voice carried the weight of judgment passed down through generations. "You are hereby stripped of all titles, all rights, all protection under pack law. You are banished from this territory, effective immediately. Any wolf who harbors you shares your punishment." Vivian swayed, her world crumbling around her. "Where am I supposed to go? You can't just, you should have thought of that before you destroyed innocent lives." Callum gestured to the guards. "Remove her from my sight. Give her 1 horse, basic supplies, and escort her to the border. After that, she is no longer our concern." As guards approached, Vivian's mask reformed one final time, fury and hatred replacing desperation. She looked at Callum with pure venom. "You'll regret this. The broken girl you're protecting will never be whole enough to be Luna. She'll fail you just as I apparently failed to kill her properly." "The only thing I regret," Callum said softly, "is that it took me so long to see you for what you truly are." They dragged her from the hall, her screams of fury echoing off stone walls until distance finally muted them. The assembled pack remained in shocked silence, processing everything they'd witnessed. Alpha Brennan approached Callum privately. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I truly didn't know what she was capable of." "But you knew she was cold, calculating. You sent her here knowing a political marriage wouldn't require warmth." "Yes," Brennan admitted. "I thought that was simply her personality. I didn't realize it masked something darker." He paused. "The girl Ashlyn, will she receive justice?" "She'll receive more than justice. She'll receive protection, resources, and every opportunity to heal from what your daughter did." Callum's eyes were hard. "Our alliance remains intact only because you acted honorably tonight. Don't test my mercy further." After Brennan and his warriors departed, Callum immediately went to the antechamber. Ashlyn stood at the window, having heard the distant commotion, but not knowing what had transpired. "It's over," Callum said simply. She turned, amber eyes wide. "What happened?" Vivian confessed. In front of the entire pack, she admitted everything. Her father disowned her publicly. The council banished her. The marriage is annulled. He crossed to her in 3 strides. "You're free, Ashlyn. Truly free." The words seemed to take a moment to penetrate. Then her legs gave out, and Callum caught her before she hit the floor, holding her as she finally broke, great racking sobs that had been held back for 5 years, spilling out all at once. "It's over," he repeated, his hand gentle in her hair. "She can never hurt you again. I promise." They sank to the floor together, Callum's back against the wall. Ashlyn curled against his chest as years of terror and pain released in waves. He held her through it all, murmuring promises and reassurances, his wolf humming with contentment at finally being allowed to comfort its mate. When the tears finally subsided and Ashlyn pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes, "I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't think justice was real. It's real, and you're safe. I swear it." She reached up, her hand trembling as it touched his face. And Callum, who'd maintained iron control through the entire hearing, felt his own walls begin to crack. "Ashlyn," he said, his voice rough, "I need you to understand something. My wolf knows you're my mate, has known since the moment I saw your scars. And I know," she whispered. "Mine knows too." The bond between them sang, no longer denied or pushed aside. "But I won't claim you until you're ready," Callum continued, "until you've had time to heal, to choose freely without pressure or obligation." "What if I'm ready now?" "You're not, and that's all right, we have time." Ashlyn settled back against his chest, and they sat there in the quiet antechamber as the territory beyond began to process the night's revelations. Somewhere in the darkness beyond Stonehaven's borders, Vivian Ashford rode alone into exile, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. Behind her, the lodge lights glowed warm, a home she'd lost through her own cruelty. Ahead, only wilderness and the cold comfort of her pride. She'd become exactly what she'd always feared forgotten, powerless alone. The morning after the hearing, Ashlyn woke in the guest quarters to find Mabel sitting beside her bed, tears streaming down the old cook's weathered face. "I'm sorry," Mabel whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't stop her sooner." Ashlyn sat up, taking the elderly woman's hands in hers. "You saved my life when I was 14. You gave me food and shelter and kindness when I had nothing. You tried to help 3 years ago and people died for it." She squeezed Mabel's fingers. "You have nothing to apologize for." They held each other while the sun rose over the mountains, two survivors finally allowed to acknowledge what they'd endured. Later, Dr. Reeves arrived for what would become daily sessions. "Your wolf is closer than it's been in years," the healer observed. "The trial breaking through the emotional release, it's weakened the barriers significantly." "I can feel it," Ashlyn admitted, pressing against the walls, not screaming anymore, just waiting. "Then let's help it find the way out." The breakthrough came on the 21st day after Vivian's banishment. A storm rolled through the mountains, the first since that night when Callum had stayed with Ashlyn through her panic. But this time, instead of fear, Ashlyn felt something else. Recognition. Her parents had loved the rain. Her mother used to open the windows during storms, letting the fresh smell of wet earth fill their cabin. Her father would tell stories by firelight, while thunder rumbled like distant drums. Rain had brought the rogues that destroyed her family, but rain had also been part of countless happy memories she'd buried beneath the trauma. Dr. Reeves guided her through the meditation, voice calm and steady. "Remember the love, not just the loss. Your wolf was formed in safety, shaped by family. That's still there, underneath everything else." Ashlyn closed her eyes. 14 years old, tucked between her parents by the fire. Her father's laugh, her mother's singing, the absolute certainty that she was loved. Inside her chest, her wolf stirred, not with the desperate violence of trauma, but with purpose, with recognition of what had been and what could be again. "Reach for it," Dr. Reeves murmured, "not with fear, with love." Ashlyn's eyes flashed amber gold. The transformation didn't seize this time, didn't lock up in remembered pain. It flowed, bones shifted, fur erupted. The change rippled through her body like water finding its natural course. When it completed, she stood on 4 legs for the first time in 10 years. Her wolf was smaller than she'd imagined, sleek and dark gray with amber eyes that gleamed with hard-won strength. Not the largest or most powerful in the pack, but whole. Finally, blessedly, whole. Dr. Reeves smiled, tears in her own eyes. "Welcome back, little wolf." The door burst open. Callum stood there, having sensed the shift through their growing bond. His eyes met hers across the room, and his own wolf surged forward in response. He shifted in one fluid motion, a massive silver-black beast that filled the room with presence and power. They circled each other slowly, his wolf larger, older, but approaching hers with careful respect, acknowledging her strength rather than challenging it. Then he nuzzled her, a gesture of tenderness that made Ashlyn's heart swell. As Ashlyn's wolf moved, something else awakened, a warmth spreading through her chest, not the mate bond, something older. A gift passed through her mother's bloodline, dormant until the wolf was whole. Dr. Reeves gasped. "Your healing aura. I've only read about this. Empathic restoration, you can help other block shifters transform." Ashlyn looked at her paws, understanding settling in. Her pain hadn't just been survival. It had been preparation, to heal others the way she'd been healed. They ran. Through the forest of Stonehaven, under the storm-dark sky, two wolves moving as one. The mate bond that had been forming for weeks crystallized completely, singing between them with rightness. When they finally stopped at dawn, both breathing hard from the run, they were miles from the lodge. They shifted back to human form, and Callum pulled Ashlyn into his arms. "You did it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're free, completely free. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know." They stood there in the early light, and Ashlyn knew what came next. "Ask me," she said softly. Callum pulled back to look at her, understanding in his gray eyes. "Are you certain there's no rush?" "I've never been more certain of anything." He took her hands in his, holding them gently. "Ashlyn Thorne, you are my true mate. My wolf has known it since the moment I truly saw you, and my heart has learned it in the weeks since." His voice carried weight and meaning. "I'm asking you now not because protocol demands it, but because I want you to have the choice. Will you be my Luna? Not out of duty or politics, but because we choose each other." Yes, Ashlyn said, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time. Yes, the claiming was mutual. His bite on her throat, her teeth breaking his skin in reciprocal claim. The mark that made them equals partners, mates. The bond sealed completely, and Ashlyn felt it settle into her soul like the final piece of a puzzle, finding its place. 3 days later, Callum called a full pack assembly. 300 wolves gathered in the Great Hall, the same space where Vivian's crimes had been exposed. But this time the atmosphere was celebratory. Callum stood at the head of the hall and Ashlyn stood beside him, no longer hidden or protected, but presented as his equal. The claiming marks were visible on both their throats, fresh, proud, chosen. You all know what happened 3 weeks ago, Callum began. You witnessed justice delivered, a monster exposed. But tonight isn't about looking back. It's about moving forward. He took Ashlyn's hand. I present Ashlyn Warwick, my true mate, and your Luna. She has proven herself through courage, through survival, and through the strength to transform pain into purpose. The response wasn't universal. Some of the older wolves still harbored prejudice against shifters who'd been blocked. But the younger generation cheered, and those who'd witnessed the hearing understood what Ashlyn represented. A survivor who'd become a leader. As my first act as Luna, Ashlyn said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, I propose the Servant Protection Act. She outlined the reforms. Mandatory monthly health examinations for all household staff. Anonymous complaint systems that went directly to the Alpha and Luna, bypassing potential abusers. Immediate removal and investigation of any supervisor found harming those under their care. Some may say these protections are unnecessary, Ashlyn continued, that good people don't need rules to treat others with basic decency. But I've learned that darkness flourishes in silence, that abuse thrives when victims have no voice. She touched the scars on her arms, no longer hidden beneath long sleeves. I wear these marks as evidence of what happens when power goes unchecked, when suffering is dismissed because the victim lacks status. Her amber eyes swept the crowd. No one else should bear these scars, not in this pack, not ever. Elder Voss stood from the council table. The council has reviewed Luna Ashlyn's proposal. We find it comprehensive, fair, and necessary. She looked at the assembled pack. All in favor of the Servant Protection Act make it known. The vote was unanimous, not because everyone agreed with every detail, but because no one wanted to be the wolf who voted against protecting the vulnerable. Not after what they'd witnessed. But Callum broke protocol. Ashlyn Thorne, he said loud enough for all to hear, I don't ask you to kneel. I don't command your submission. I ask you to stand beside me. Equal, partner, mate. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't how claimings were done. Lunas accepted. They didn't choose, but Ashlyn stepped forward, chin high, meeting his eyes. Callum Warwick, I don't offer you obedience. I offer you partnership. My strength for yours. My voice beside yours. My choice freely given. The older wolves shifted uncomfortably. The younger ones, those who'd witnessed the trial, understood. This was a new kind of Luna, a new kind of pack. When their teeth broke skin, when the bond sealed, the pack howled. Not in dominance, in celebration. The reforms passed into law that night, and within weeks, other packs began adopting similar measures. Ashlyn's pain had created a legacy that spread far beyond Stonehaven's borders. 6 months passed. The territory flourished under joint leadership. Callum's strategic mind paired with Ashlyn's empathetic insight created a balance that served the pack well. The reforms worked. Productivity increased 40% as servants who felt valued and protected worked with renewed dedication. Anonymous complaints uncovered 3 cases of abuse in the first 2 months, all handled swiftly and publicly, sending a clear message that the old ways were gone. Ashlyn sat in a council meeting reviewing harvest reports with the elders when she felt the familiar flutter in her abdomen. Her hand moved instinctively to the slight swell beneath her tunic. 6 weeks pregnant, according to Dr. Reeves, conceived shortly after the claiming ceremony. She'd planned to tell Callum privately first, but Elder Voss noticed the gesture and smiled knowingly. Is there something you'd like to share with the council, Luna? Ashlyn met Callum's eyes across the table. He'd known for days the mate bond made it impossible to hide, but had been waiting for her to announce it when she was ready. I'm pregnant, she said simply. About 6 weeks. The council erupted in congratulations, plans already forming for security protocols and succession arrangements. After the meeting, Callum found her in their private quarters. How are you feeling? He asked, pulling her into his arms. Terrified, excited, both at once. She looked up at him. Our child will grow up in a world so different from the one I knew. Because you changed it. We changed it. together. A knock at the door interrupted them. A guard entered, bowing apologetically. Luna, there's a young woman at the gates seeking sanctuary. She says she's fled from the Western Territories. Claims her Luna has been mistreating her. Ashlyn and Callum exchanged glances. This had become more common in recent months. Word had spread about Stonehaven's reforms about a Luna who'd survived abuse and now protected their others. Women seeking escape found their way here, knowing they'd be believed. Bring her to the guest quarters, Ashlyn said. Feed her, give her clean clothes, tell her she's safe. I'll speak with her tomorrow. After the guard left, Ashlyn stood by the window overlooking the territory. The mountains stretched beyond, beautiful and vast. Callum joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hand resting on her abdomen, where their child grew. Do you ever think about her? Ashlyn asked quietly. Vivian. Sometimes, wondering where she ended up, if she's still alive. Reports had been vague, sightings in Eastern Territories always fleeing before anyone could confirm. No pack would harbor her once they learned her identity. She'd become exactly what she'd feared, powerless, alone, rejected. I hope she's alive, Ashlyn said. Callum was surprised. Why? Because death would be mercy. I want her to live with what she did, to face every day knowing she destroyed herself through her own cruelty. There was steel in Ashlyn's voice. Not hatred, but justice. She'd forgiven herself for surviving. But she didn't owe Vivian forgiveness. The scars are still there, Ashlyn said, running her fingers over the marks on her arms. Physical ones have faded, but I remember every one. Sometimes I wake up and forget I'm safe. Sometimes I still flinch. That's not weakness. That's memory. I know, Dr. Reeves says the trauma will always be part of me, but it doesn't have to define me. She turned in his arms. I survived, Callum. I healed. And now I'm building something that matters. They stood together as the sun set Callum's hand on her belly where their daughter grew. Dr. Reeves had confirmed it that morning, a girl's strong heartbeat. What will we name her? Ashlyn asked. Marianne, Callum said without hesitation. After your mother, so she knows the strength she comes from. Ashlyn's tears came freely now, happy tears, healing tears. Marianne Thorne Warwick, she'll grow up knowing love, not fear. Knowing her voice matters, because her mother made sure of it. Ashlyn touched the scars on her arms one last time. She'd kept them visible deliberately, not as shame, but as testimony. Evidence that survival was possible, that broken things could heal, that a girl with nothing could become a Luna who changed everything. I kept my promise, she whispered the words both remembrance and benediction. A vow fulfilled after 10 long years. I survived, Mama, and now others will too. In the guest quarters, a young woman from the Western Territories slept peacefully for the first time in years, knowing she was safe. In the eastern wilds, Vivian Ashford woke to another cold dawn, alone and forgotten. And in the heart of Stonehaven, under a sky painted gold, two wolves who'd found each other against impossible odds stood together. Not because they had to, because they chose to, every single day.